Assistant Professor and HOD, Department of Political Science, Parul Institute of Arts, Parul University. Today we are gathered here to get a in August 2017, violence erupted in Rakhine uh, state in Myanmar, targeting the Rohingya people, a stateless Muslim minority. People fled to humanitarian crisis in the world. For which is also UN's high. So please, sir, give us.
And first of all, I would like to thank Lopa Raval Madam, Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of Political Science, Parul Institute of Arts, and also Chirag Jasar, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, Parul Institute of Arts, for giving me an opportunity to speak to the students of the Department of Political Science, Parul Institute of Arts, Parul University. As you all know, and Lopa ma'am already mentioned that today I'm going to speak on the Rohingya refugee crisis, reflections and possibilities. Now, this talk I'm going to divide in three broad segments. In the first segment, I'll be introducing some important themes of this talk by highlighting the meaning of the term refugee. We'll talk about some international instruments that are, you know, that are international instruments that basically managing the refugee issues. I will talk about Refugee Convention of 1951. What are the rights the refugees have as per this convention? Unfortunately, South Asia is not signatories. None of them are signatories to this convention, and it's a protocol of 1967. But we'll have a brief idea about what refugees are and what is the centerpiece international instrument that is committed to refugee protection. Then we'll come back to the Rohingya refugee crisis. First of all, we'll make sense of who are the Rohingyas, what are their historical claims. We'll also talk about why Rohingyas are fleeing from Myanmar. So I'll give you a sort of a historical timeline. We'll also talk about major concerns of this issue of a displacement of a population. And we'll also talk about some dimensions of this issue. And at the end, we'll have a concluding observations. So that is how this talk is structured. So let me first of all start with the introduction part. As we all know, displacement of population and refugees, which is believed to be one of the critical issue in international relations. There are plenty of other global issues which includes refugee crisis, peace and security, global poverty, violation of human rights, climate change, global terrorism, global migration, developmental challenges, gender equality, food security, health and other diseases, oceans and laws of the seas, water scarcity and redistribution, international law and justice, trade related issues, technological issues, weapons of mass destruction, and so on. So these all issues are considered as a contemporary global issues or critical issues in international relations, and displacement of population and refugees are also one of the critical issues, and that is why this issue for a variety of reasons are critical issues. So here we have chosen one issue, and that is the displacement of population and refugee, so which is also a critical issue in international relations. So refugees are, generally speaking, are persons fleeing persecution, war, or violence in their home states. And when individuals feel threatened in their home states and they feel that their home government is persecuting them that they are at the risk, that they may be at a risk of, let's say, hurt or harmed, or maybe killed in a war or a violence in their home states. As a result, they flee from their home country and they enter into the another country. Now, refugees are technically speaking persons that are fleeing persecution, war, or violence and cross a border from one state's territory to another state's territory. Now, it's not only the uh, persecution, war, or a violence. Sometimes natural disasters, which is due to climate change. Let's say it can also force people to seek refuge in the other states. Such disasters like floods or earthquakes or hurricanes and mudslides and so on. But if we speaking of refugees and if we coming to the plausible understanding of the term refugee, there's a specific convention for a refugee, which is officially called the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees, which is popularly also called the Refugee Convention of 1951, which is believed to be one of the centerpiece of international refugee protection today. And this convention came into force in 1954 and it has been amended once, that is in 1967, in the form of protocol. Speaking of this convention, one of the beginning part of the convention, that is Article 1 Clause A, which defines who are the refugees. So as per Article 1 Clause A says that refugee is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin. Now, why this happened? This happened owing to the well-founded fear of being persecuted. Now, why persecuted? Persecuted for the reasons of a race, persecuted for the reason of a religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or even political opinion. So, this convention provisions, for example, are to be applied without discrimination as to race, religion, or country of origin. So when refugees arrive of a different states due to this well-founded fear of persecution on different bases, under international law, every individual has the right to be protected from the persecution. So Refugee Convention basically provides for rights which includes access to the courts, access to the primary education, access to work, provision for a documentation, including refugee travel documents in a passport form in certain cases. So these individuals then may seek asylum in another country. Now, another possibility is that if those individuals flee but do not cross the boundary, sometimes also happen that they are fleeing the persecution on different bases, but they do not cross the state's territory. They are often called internally displaced persons. But if they cross the state's territory, then they need to seek the asylum. And in that case, there are three possibilities. I mean, so when refugee flees into another country and then they're residing into another state, there's a lengthy process that they get into of holding, facilities or a refugee camp. So one of the three things that possibly can happen, and one is that called repatriation. Now, repatriation may be voluntary or it may be forced. Second possibility is that they may actually end up settling inside another state and may eventually become the citizens of that state. And third possibility is that individual may be settled in a third country, that they may be moved to the another country or another state. So these are the three possibilities. So repatriation, settling in a host countries, or resettlement in a third country is a great deal in international system, which makes refugee issue a very interesting and a complicated issue. There are no overnight solutions to these problems. So these issues, speaking from a realist perspective, rather managed rather than completely, coming for a solution of this. So interestingly, this refugee issue or the influx of a refugee, which is also has certain concerns which can be political, it can be economic, geographical, or even cultural concerns. So for example, the influx of a refugee also correlates with a rise in a right wing, or let's say anti-immigrants movements. I mean, in those states where there are center-right political parties and the power, we can easily see that. There are also economic elements to this issue, because refugee put a huge strain on a scarce resources of the host countries. And it has a cultural elements as well. For instance, the cultural differences between the Europeans and the Americans on the one hand, and the immigrants from the Middle East and Africa on the other hand. And this creates issues of, let's say, racism and intolerance. So now we will try, I hope now you understood that what are the refugee, how this legal instrument at international level speaks of refugee protection. Now I will try and speaking on the point that why displacement of a population and refugee is a critical issue. I'll be giving you very briefly some data which will help you understand that it is a critical issue. So if we go with the UNHCR, as Lopama mentioned in her introduction, that by the mid 2021, an estimated 84 million people are forcibly displaced worldwide, according to the UNHCR. And this includes around an estimated 48 million people which are internally displaced, around 26 millions are refugees, around 4.4 million are asylum seekers, and around 3.9 million Venezuelan displaced abroad. Interestingly, more than two-thirds of the refugees under UNHCR mandates and Venezuelan displaced abroad, which comes from mainly 5 countries by mid 2021. So, what are the 5 countries from where maximum amount of displaced or refugees are coming, which includes Syria, Syrian Arab Republic, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and today's our case study, that is Myanmar. Around 1.1 million people by mid 2021 as per the UNHCR mandate that are coming from. So an estimated 35 million, that is roughly 42% of the 82.4 million forcibly displaced people are actually children. So you can see 35 million of this displaced population are below the age of 18. That is by mid 2021, which makes it a critical issue. And there are many dimensions to this. So between 2018 and 2020, an average between 2,90,000 to 3,40,000 children were born into the refugee camps every year. Developing countries host nearly 85% of the world's refugees, and 73% of the refugees and other Venezuelan displaced abroad lives in countries which are neighboring countries. So, for instance, this Rohingya refugees are living in Bangladesh today, or many of them previously went to the other Southeast Asian countries. Some of them reached to India as well. So, this is something that makes this displacement of population and refugee as one of the critical issues in international relations. I hope this data justifies the point. Now I'll come to the most important part of the talk, and that is speaking of the Rohingya refugees. So I'll be speaking on, first of all, who are the Rohingyas, and we'll also be answering the question that why they are fleeing Myanmar. So as Lopamam already mentioned, that Rohingyas are an ethnic Muslim minority. It's a Sunni Islam minority. Remember, it is not a religious issue, but it is much more an ethnic issue, because this Rohingya is one of the ethnicity, which is, you will eventually learn that is not recognized as one of the ethnicity in the Citizenship Act of Myanmar, and that is why they are stateless people. So Rohingyas are an ethnic Muslim minority in Myanmar state, and majority of the an estimated 1 million Rohingya in Myanmar, they are actually residing in a state called the Rakhine state of Myanmar, which is nearby to the Bangladesh border. You can easily locate them in the map. Rohingya basically differ from Myanmar's dominant Buddhist group in terms of ethnicity, in terms of linguistically as well as religiously. There are different practices, there are different customs. And Rohingya people, as we all know, that are a stateless Muslim minority, and they have become, or they have been forced basically, they've been forced out of the Myanmar by violence and racism for more than 20 years. I mean, decades of violence that they have become subject to. So Myanmar's government basically refuses to recognize the Rohingya people as one of the 135 official minority groups in the country, and that is why Rohingyas have been even denied citizenship. So since independence, Myanmar, which was earlier called the state of Burma, so Burma became independent. We all have a studied history. We all know that at one point of time it was also part of the British India. Uh, but since independence in 1948, successive governments in Burma was renamed as a Myanmar in 1989. So since various governments that came to Burma and then Myanmar, they have refused Rohingyas' historical claims, and they denied this particular group. So they've been denied group recognition as one of the country's 135 ethnic groups. So, as per one of the historical claim of a Rohingya, they believe that they trace their origin into the region to around the 15th century, when thousands of Muslims they came to the former Arakan kingdom. Many others arrived during the 19th century and early 20th century, and when Rakhine state was governed by the colonial rule as a part of the British India. So since Rohingya ethnically not recognized, according to there's this important law which you need to keep in mind, which is called 1982 Burmese Citizenship Law. So according to the Burmese citizenship law, a Rohingya is eligible for a citizenship only if they provide proofs that their ancestors have lived in the country prior to 1823. In that case, Rohingya are eligible to become a citizen. Otherwise, they are stateless. Otherwise, they are classified as a resident foreigners or associate citizens. And even if one of the parent is a Myanmar citizen. So that is why the Myanmar government, you can say, has effectively institutionalized discrimination against this ethnic group. They have imposed variety of restrictions. Now these restrictions are imposed, let's say, on marriage, on family planning, on employment, education, religious choices, and freedom of movement. So throughout the last several decades in Myanmar, life of the Rohingya people has been increasingly characterized by systematic deprivation and human rights violation. With official state policies, so there are certain official state policies were brought in place to restrict Rohingya in their ability to, let's say, marry, travel, to have children, access medical care, attend schools, employment, and so on. If I have to give an example, for example, in 2005, a policy was introduced in Myanmar which limits Rohingya family to have two children. Or Rohingya, they must also seek permission if they wanted to marry, which may acquire them to bribe the authorities in many occasions, and also provide photographs, for instance, photographs of the bride without the head scarf, and for a groom with a clean shaven face. I mean, these kind of practices which are often conflicting in the Muslim customs of a Rohingya. So you can say that even if they have to move to the new home, or even if they have to travel outside their township, Rohingya must gain governmental approval. So you can say that effective. So Myanmar government or Myanmar authority has effectively institutionalized discrimination against Rohingya, because they are not recognized as one of the ethnic. I mean, because they are not citizen, because their ethnicity is not recognized and that is why they are a stateless people or associate citizens, or you can say secondary citizens of the state, or subjects, because they have to go through these all forms of discrimination. So Rohingyas are essentially stateless people without legal rights and other forms of protection. And Rohingya children and Rohingyas families are vulnerable to human trafficking, child labor, child marriage, gender based violence, and other forms of exploitation and abuses. Now, majority of the Rohingya population is living in a Rakhine state, and Rakhine state is Myanmar's one of the least developed state, with a poverty rate. For instance, when this whole exodus mass departure of a Rohingya started by 2017, the poverty rate was around 78%. And so there's a widespread poverty in that region, poor infrastructure, and lack of employment opportunities as well. So I hope this addresses to our first question's answer, that who are the Rohingyas. Now we will try and understand that why Rohingyas fleeing Myanmar. So in order to understand, in order to address this question, we need to go through the timeline of the crisis. So very briefly, I'll be highlighting the timeline of the crisis. I'll start from some recent developments. We'll start from 2012 to today onwards. So in 2012, as I already said, that systematic discrimination has been institutionalized since decades, and Rohingya became subject to it. But recently, some events happened which led to widespread clash and violence in the state. So 2012, one major crisis started in Myanmar in the month of June in a northern Rakhine, mainly between the ethnic Rakhine Buddhist and Rohingya Muslims. Now, this clash was, eventually resulted into a gang rape and murder of a Rakhine Buddhist women when Rohingya men were accused of raping and killing a Buddhist woman, and Buddhist nationalists responded by burning Rohingya homes, killing more than an estimated 280 people and displacing tens of thousands of the Rohingya from the Rakhine state. And from then onwards, even if you see, there are around 40,000 Rohingyas per even came to India as well. I mean, from 2012 to the event up to 2017. However, India, for a variety of reasons, started deporting them back and considered them as an illegal immigrant. But with this event, nearly 9,000 people lost their homes and nearly 2,500 houses were burned in this crisis. And from then onwards, the clashes day by day started becoming intense in the state. By 2015, the government of Myanmar systematically isolates this ethnic minority, and this resulted into the mass departure or exodus of thousands of Rohingyas to Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. Even some of them, they paid to the smugglers by risky boat journey. Sometimes they're also called the boat people because they were, they were smuggled by the smugglers in these boats with a very little capacity of accommodating the people, and more than that people. So usually you see that the boat is sinking and so many Rohingyas were died in the process. So most displaced Rohingya has been forced to take shelter in a squalid refugee camps, and others have turned to smugglers, and they are paying for a transport out of Myanmar because of the kind of atrocities that were committed against them. But since 2016, situation getting worst, and when a series of attacks on a security post started taking place along the Myanmar Bangladesh border, particularly in the month of October 2016, which triggered another outbreak of ethnic violence in a Rakhine state. And most intense event happened, that is August 2017, which we all are aware, we read in the newspaper that clashes in a Rakhine state broke out once again on a major scale in August 2017 after a militant group which is known as Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, which is called ARSA, ARSA. Now this group claimed responsibility for coordinating attacks on a police and army post in which more than 100 people or personnel died. So the Myanmar government declared ARSA, that is Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, as a terrorist organization following these attacks when they took the responsibility. And then Myanmar security forces, they responded by launching counter-terrorism operations against the insurgents. But what happened, if you go with some references like, let's say, human rights, certain human rights groups, for instance, Human Rights Watch, or if you go with the observations and expert, uh, remarks made by, let's say, Amnesty International. Amnesty International is an international non-governmental organization, particularly in the field of human rights violation. So they said that these operations, which were carried out by the Myanmar army, which involved arbitrary killings, which involved systematic rapes of the women, burning of the houses of the Rohingya people, and forced expulsions of the locals. And it is one of the brutality that were committed by the Rohingya army, the Myanmar army against the Rohingya people. So then, after more than 1 million Rohingyas have fled Rakhine due to the kind of violence that broke out in the state. United Nations said that Rohingya are one of the most persecuted minority in the world, and the Myanmar Rohingya crackdown, as I already said, the kind of atrocities were committed as the textbook example of ethnic cleansing. And currently, the UNHCR estimates as of now by September 2021 that around 9 lakhs 2,947 individuals that are residing in the camps in Bangladesh, and in average family is around 4.7 people. So most of these refugees have settled, like if we're speaking in case of Bangladesh, they were settled in the Cox's Bazar. That's a region in Bangladesh. And of these refugees in the camp, 51% of them are actually children. Around 4% of these refugees are older people, and 1% are the people with a disability. Now, Bangladeshi government is trying to get these refugees, let's say, get these refugees, transfer them to one of the remote island that they are preparing in the Bay of Bengal, and which Bangladesh government actually developed specifically for the purpose of the resettling of the refugees. But if you look at the conditions of the camps in which these refugees are living, it is not always the safest, because even though there are a large number of humanitarian aids that they are receiving, but what happens, there are many other problems that these refugees are facing in the camp. For instance, some natural disasters, like let's say massive floodings that happened in the month of July 2021. Many landslides, and that lead to death of several refugees, and also their shelter got destroyed in that natural catastrophe. Series of fire incidents are also reported in these camps, and there are also major concerns of drinking water, let's say concerns of sanitation, hygiene, and particularly the safety for women and girls. And there are also, specifically when COVID-19, the series of concerns of COVID-19, because it is one of the densely populated refugee camps, and also there are major concerns of mental health and counseling support. It is also one of the critical issue. So when this when this mass departure happened, these are the major concerns or dimensions that are associated with these refugees. But how international community responded to that? So first of all, we'll speak of how, let's say, because Myanmar is one of the country particularly how ASEAN reacted to this. We'll also speak of the international community's response. We spoke of United Nations considering this as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. So, if you look at the ASEAN's response to this crisis, there has been no coordinated response to the Rohingya problems from the ASEAN, and the nature of the response indicates a sort of a divided region on this issue. So till now, there remains a notable lack of pressure on Myanmar, particularly from ASEAN. Speaking of the United States of America, particularly the State Department of United States expressed its intent to take in Rohingya refugees as a part of international efforts, and since 2002, United States has allowed around 13,000 Myanmar refugees in the United States, particularly living in Chicago, which is a home to the refugee one, and it has one of the largest population of Rohingyas. Living in Chicago back then. Speaking of the United Nations response, in August 2016, United Nations established a 9-person commission which was led by the former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan. And this commission was meant to discuss the options and also to propose a possible solution to this problem. So the committee eventually submitted its final report to the Myanmar government on August 23rd, 2017. And the committee's final report included that certain recommendations as well to reduce communal tension and support much needed development efforts in the impoverished state of Myanmar. Speaking of the response of Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, she is representing the political party called the Awami League. She called her own country's economic migrants mentally sick, and she said that they could have a better lives in Bangladesh, and also complained that they were discrediting Bangladesh by leaving. Shortly after, the Bangladesh government announced a certain plans to relocate around 32,000 Rohingya refugees, which are registered Rohingya refugees who have spent years in camps in Bangladesh, the camps which are located near the Bangladesh-Myanmar borders, and also around 2 lakh unregistered and other refugees that are living in Bangladesh. So they are not officially part of the government's relocation plan also. But initially, there's a place called Thengar Char. It's an island which is 18 miles east of the Hatia Island. Was reportedly selected for the relocation process, and subsequent report put location as 200 hectares selected as a Hatia. It's a 9 hours. So some of the refugees, also relocated there as well. If you look at the various autonomous organizations or NGOs, and the kind of documentaries have been shot on the experiences of the people, you might experience horrific images that they've been through. I would recommend, if students are interested, you can watch a documentary made by the Vice, where you will see the real life experiences. Because when the Myanmar military launched attacks on insurgents, because these attacks they claim that are not carried out against the Rohingya per se. These attacks were carried out against the insurgents or terrorist organization. But in the process, houses were burned down. People even shot videos by using the kind of phones that they have. They show mass killings of the people in the hands of the Myanmar army. And that is how the international community also accused the Myanmar government, and even also recommended Myanmar to stop this violence and come up with the management of this issue. So that is what the response of the I'll also speak of India's response as well. As we all know, as I already mentioned, that India, the Indian government wants to deport. I mean, the way the time you know Rohingya started coming to India, it's not in 2007, but after 2017, the numerical strength has increased. But till, I mean, from 2012 onwards, uh, refugees were started coming. Even though India is also not signatory to the Refugee Convention of 1951 and also not signatory to it's a protocol of 1967. In fact, South Asia has its own refugee management policy, which differ from state to state. I'll be highlighting again what are the reasons. However, there are no officially stated reasons given by any of the South Asian states, but experts predict that there are certain reasons why they are not signatories to this centerpiece legal document that is protecting the interests of the Rohingyas. So the Indian government wants to deport over 40,000 Rohingya Muslims who have been living in the country for almost half a decade and have declared India declared them as a illegal immigrants. You'll be surprised to know that India is one of the country that has received so many refugees from the day there was a political transformation of a power from the British to the indigenous people. We know the partition where thousands of them people got displaced. Eventually, we saw Tibetan representatives, which came in the event when there was a Lhasa uprising, when People's Liberation Army entered into the Tibet to liberate Tibet. So, under the spiritual and political leader Dalai Lama, so many refugees, came to India. India gave them shelter on a humanitarian grounds. Chakmas or ethnic Sri Lankans are also been given shelter on a humanitarian grounds. In 1971, in the kind of systematic genocide launched by the Pakistan authorities when General Tikka Khan, when martial law was imposed in East Pakistan in early 70s, thousands of Bengalis and other Hindus they migrated to India. We all know it, which eventually leads to India-Pakistan conflict of 1971. A couple of days back, there was a Navy Day which celebrated Operation Trident, which was carried out by Indian Navy on 3rd December, actually, exactly before 50 years that conflict was started. So, I mean, these are some of the examples which explain that India has always been a refugee receiving countries, but with this case, there are certain concerns that when India responded to the Rohingya crisis, that is around 40,000 Rohingyas actually are in India, living in India, are actually registered with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, while the rest of them are said to be staying illegally in India. But one thing that we need to understand that India is not signatory to the United Nations Refugee Convention, and also it's a protocol of 1967. So I'll very briefly speaking on now that what kind of refugee management that we see in a South Asia. I'll give an example of India as well. Interestingly, none of the South Asian states are signatories to the Refugee Convention, and it's a protocol of 1967. And none of them even officially stated reasons as well. But certain experts in international relations, they predict certain reasons, and the prediction is, it's more security related. So the main line of argument is that borders in South Asia are extremely porous, and any conflict in South Asia can result in a mass movement of the people. Excuse me. Now, this can have two results. First, a huge strain on local infrastructure as well as resources in any countries, because this all countries are poorly equipped to deal with the sudden spikes in population. There are also some experts who believe that the unfair treatment by UNHCR of those states is also one of the reasons the states are not parties to them. So the porous nature of the borders in South Asia, continuous demographic changes, poverty, because this all South Asian states, even though India is you know one of the major state in the South Asia, but India is also, these all South Asian states have certain common problems of a lack of infrastructure, abject poverty, demographic changes. So due to the porous borders in the South Asia, demographic changes, poverty, resource crunch, and also excuse me, internal political discontent. So this is, I mean, in political science we study lack of political will, right? Is also one of the reason which made it for those states to accede to this convention or it's a protocol. Now, what happens in case of India, as I was mentioning, that how into opposed to this incident, how India responded. So, Minister of a State Home Ministry at that time, 2017, I'm talking about Rijiju. He said, please bear with me. I'm having this, and I apologize for. So he said that nobody should preach. I mean, I'm just reading his statement that nobody should preach to India on the issue, as the country has accommodated large number of refugees over time. I've already given some examples as well. The minister further said that the center has decreed the state governments to set up the task force to identify and deport Rohingyas, including those who even registered with the UNHCR. Some of the fundamental issues that India, in various statements given by those officials, which reflected, which includes the radicalization of the youth, because as I already talked about ARSA, so one of the security related reasons India tried and justify of deporting them, economic strain on India's scarce resources, also one of the reason. So he said that in for the next statement that I want to tell the international organizations that whether the Rohingyas are registered under the UNHCR or not, they are illegal immigrants in India. And center at that time argues that India does not have to consider the refugee status which is given by the United Nations to the Rohingya, because India is not a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention. So we saw that eventually, because there are certain rights, and I'm speaking of fundamental rights that are also available to the non-citizens. So some of the PILs were also filed in the Supreme Courts, and the hearings were going on. But that is also, India's response. Now, when this matter happened, eventually, this matter was also taken to the International Court of Justice. So I'll very briefly speaking of how the matter was taken to the ICJ and how officially the state councillor or responded to those allegations. So the Gambia is one of the small West African country that filed the lawsuit on behalf of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. In fact, at that time, none of the OIC countries, brought this matter to the international community. So there was a coalition of countries with a significant Muslim population. Remember, this is more an ethnic issue rather than a religious one. So I'll be speaking of, when this matter was taken. So November 2019, the Republic of Gambia filed an application instituting proceedings and request for the provisional measures at the International Court of Justice. And that was filed, of course, against the government of Myanmar. This was filed because of, as I already said, that human rights groups such as the Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, they said that those operations carried out by the Myanmar army, which involved arbitrary killings, systematic rapes, burning of the houses, and forced expulsions, and that led to mass departure or exodus of more than 1 million Rohingya from the Myanmar state to the neighboring country. So United Nations at that time considered Rohingya persecution as the I mean, Rohingya minority as the most persecuted minority in the world. And there was an UN fact finding mission which investigated all allegations, and they found such compelling evidences that it is said that Burmese army must be investigated for the kind of genocide that they committed against the Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine. And UN also, I already mentioned previously, that Myanmar Rohingya crackdown as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. So, under one of the international legal instrument called Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crimes of a Genocide, this convention was signed in 1948, and by December 2019, there are 152 parties who have ratified and acceded to this treaty. And at that time, so International Court of Justice, as we all know, which is one of the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, and ICJ's primary function are to settle international legal disputes which are submitted by states, and it gives advisory opinion on legal issues which are referred to it by the United Nations. So what the government of Myanmar responded to that, let me try and talk about. So we all know Aung San Suu Kyi. Aung San Suu Kyi, she happened to be at that time, and we all know that she has also received a Nobel Prize for the peace she fought. In fact, sometimes back, along with Dalai Lama and Aung San Suu Kyi are considered as some of the Gandhians that practiced the way of non-violence. So she fought along for a because initially Burma and then Myanmar has always been subject to different types of military dictatorship, but she was for a long period of time under the house arrest. NLD political party she formed. Even though at that time when she was responding, because she happened to be the state councillor for Myanmar at the time when the matter was brought to the ICJ, so she was a de facto ruler. So Aung San Suu Kyi, she was at that time also the Union Minister for Foreign Affairs. Actually, she has been widely criticized for remaining mostly silent on accusations of anti-Rohingya violence. And she also responded by saying that these atrocities were committed. She basically defended the Myanmar army by saying that these attacks were carried out against the insurgents or terrorists, not against the common people. But I mean, she was the one which was so. What she responded. So we also need to understand that the kind of political system that Myanmar state follows, there are as of now, we already know that again military dictatorship has came to the place, and there are very limited powers that the civilian governments have, and she was under probably the tremendous pressure to speak against the military. So in Myanmar's defense, Suu Kyi said that during, I mean, when there was a charges against, when there was a charges for genocide against the Myanmar, she said that these charges of a genocide is misleading, and because there are cycles of international violences in case of Myanmar. I mean, it started from 1940s onwards. I mean, the day Myanmar became independent till today. So she further argued that the military's action in a Rakhine state was an anti-terrorism campaign, and it was mainly against violent Rohingya extremist group ARSA, which we talked about previously. And she conceding that Myanmar's military, I mean, she also admitted the fact that some degree Myanmar's military might have used disproportionate forces. So at that time, I mean, she also told the court that if soldiers have committed the war crimes, they would be prosecuted in a Myanmar state. So that kind of matter that was ICJ. However, we also need to understand that the ruling against Myanmar are not relatively going to change things for Rohingya, for instance. So a ruling from the court to approve measures to protect the Rohingya is expected anytime. But the final ruling of the accusation of a genocide might take several years. We need to wait, and a guilty ruling could lead to sanctions and it would cause significant reputational and economic changes into the state of Myanmar as well. But however, we also need to understand that International Court of Justice cannot send Suu Kyi and military leaders into jail or cannot take disciplinary actions because ICJ lacks any coercive mechanism to enforce its judgments. And United Nations Security Council comes and can compel the states to follow the court's ruling. But there are several problems with these methods of enforcement, which realistically speaking, I mean, there are lesser chances. So it was demonstrated by the execution. I mean, 2 years after the provisional measures were imposed, like there are many cases which even take a lot of time, years. And there's also possibility that the People's Republic of China, in case if Security Council comes, might exercise veto power to block, because Myanmar and China currently having the kind of relations, the way China influencing the Myanmar. I mean, which is also part of China's some ambitious projects which we study in a foreign policy. So that is also one possibility that we can see. So that is what the some recent developments that see. So what happens in these South Asian states, particularly in Afghanistan, this Bangladesh, where majority of them are living and they're facing major issues, which I highlighted. What happens usually, UNHCR works with the government, UNHCR cooperates with the and various NGOs and other humanitarian aids, certain civil society organizations through which they facilitate refugees and asylum seekers. Institutions, they can have an access to education and policy on assistance to the people which are displaced due to persecution in their home countries are determined by I mean, through government's bilateral or multilateral process with those countries, I mean, that are in line of international relations policy. So there is also realistically speaking. So speaking of the possibilities, and I'm now coming to the concluding observations part of this talk. We already spoke of international community's response. I highlighted ASEAN's response, Bangladesh response, US's response, and United Nations response. There are some, and particularly, as I already mentioned, that some of the major issues, and if you see the real life experiences of those people who got displaced, they permanently lost place of their origin, and they are so scared if they've been deported back. They are not even willing to go back to the Myanmar where they saw this violence, this persecution in their in their eyes. But even their conditions living in those refugee camps and the way there are problems, some critical needs, which includes sexual and gender-based violence and prevention response, which is also one of the critical need of the people that are living in this. So then water, sanitation, hygiene, which is called the wash facilities, which are also not absent, because a large number of hand washing taps, for example, were installed in households. And specifically coming up of the COVID-19, the situation got much more worse. So Bangladesh is also the kind of a state that also, because these refugees have put huge strain on Bangladesh economic sources, scarce resources as well. So the testing capacity for a COVID-19 and vaccination was also one of the major challenges. However, the Bangladesh authority claims that they, conducted the kind of vaccination drives and have managed to, vaccinate people. But this was also one of the major challenge. That is a testing capacity of COVID-19. There is also one important concern that we need to keep in mind, and that is the unrestricted financial support by the responding agency. So, for instance, in addition to the United Nations, I mean to say UNHCR, there are at least 27 operational non-governmental organizations. NGOs are, the UNHCR refers to them as the partners. They're also working to support UNHCR during this complex humanitarian emergency. with much of the philanthropic support and attention of the world focused on COVID-19 and support for ongoing humanitarian emergencies is a key. So, unrestricted financial support by this responding agency is also one of the concerns. Support for a camp and a building design and construction is also a major challenge because the kind of funds that Bangladesh receives, I've already mentioned that since South Asia is a not signatory, UNHCR usually works with the government, with the NGOs, civil society, so that they can facilitate, these people can have an access to education, public health, legal aids, etc. So that is also one of the concern. And lastly, I briefly mentioned that is a mental support because around 50% of this displaced population, I mean, are the children. So imagine, I mean, everyday children, and their mental health, which is also going to, and counseling support is also going to be a huge challenge. So the traumas that that occurred in a Myanmar, and that led people to flee, which will require some ongoing support. If you see those documentaries which I was mentioning, documentary by BBC or documentary by Vice, you will see the people are in a still trauma. They saw their family members being burnt alive, or women's being raped by soldiers. I mean, that kind of trauma. So this require counseling. I mean, it also needs to be addressed. However, there are additional other traumas because once they reach to, I mean, those states by those dangerous boat journey. So traumas and issues developed within camps, which is also one of the serious concern that also requires support, including the impacts of COVID-19 and the effects of lockdown. Excuse me. The recent springs of fire I mentioned and losses which are occurred in the spring and summer floods that happen. So these are the also some critical needs that which needs to be addressed. So I believe that this concluding observations may help you understand the the existing conditions of these Rohingya refugees. I hope that you learned something new today from this talk. And once again, I would like to thank Lopa ma'am and the Parul University for giving me an opportunity to speak to the students. And I also would like to thank all the students for listening to me and also tolerating my coughing, which I couldn't help. But yeah, so with this now I'm concluding my today's talk, and now over to you, Lopa ma'am.
Sir, it was really insightful talk. So many things which I also didn't know, despite of reading so much. It was really well researched. Whole topic was really good. Thank you so much for coming and giving us time and for delivering such an amazing talk. And I really want to thank you, Jitin sir, Brijesh sir, and all the view webinar team for arranging such a beautiful webinar today. And yes, I want to thank you, Gopi ma'am also, which are our faculty coordinator of the webinar. Chirag Jha sir for arranging the talk with you. And of course, our dean sir, Dr. Robbie sir, who supported us. Thank you so much for coming.